an article he wrote in August last year, the director for East and Southern Africa Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime, Julian Rademe, says illegal gold mining has been on the rise for over 20 years in South Africa. As large mining operations close shop and leave the country, abandoned shafts have become magnets for a growing number of illegal miners. These mines are plagued by violent incidents. These include murder, sexual assault offences, and you include other offences here. Julian Rademe joining us now for a broader look at this scourge of illegal mining in South Africa. Julian, reading that article, I had to get you in to talk to us about this because it was very enlightening for me. So let's start with what I think South Africans are desperate to hear. We know about the thriving illicit gold industry in South Africa. The so-called Zamazamas are at the heart of it, but we are struggling to connect the dots here as to who are the kingpins. Let's start there.
Thanks for having me on. So I think the Zamazamas in many instances are, merely the foot soldiers. They're the low-hanging fruit. It's a good way to build up statistics with quick arrests if you target Zamazamas. What we really need, and I think the Premier of Gauteng, Panyaza Masufi, echoed that this week when he said we need a new strategy. We need new approaches that bring in expertise and law enforcement expertise to look at the broader chains that exist. This is a multi-billion rand industry in many senses that has tentacles which reach, as far as the United Arab Emirates, China, and India. The gold processing facilities, for instance, where gold is processed, it brings that into question. We have more than 100 refineries in Gauteng, most of them on the West Rand, and some of them are involved in refining gold from illegal mining operations. We have, issues around the sales of second-hand gold. But there are other deeper underlying issues too. This is not just a law enforcement issue. It's a socio-economic issue. The Angelo informal settlement didn't just spring up overnight and become a hub of illegal mining. This is a community that has been there for a very long time. Yeah. And, the conditions in that settlement are shocking. It's particularly if you consider that this is, 2023 and allows illegal activity to thrive because there's clearly a governance void, there's clearly a law enforcement void that exists.
Yeah. Julian, you're going to forgive me here. I want to use an analogy of a festering wound. This has been allowed to go on untreated for a long time. Talk to us about how South African authorities have allowed for that to happen and perhaps include the neighboring countries.
Well, that exactly is the problem, and we tend to have these, immediate law enforcement responses, as we've seen this week, with, police swooping into the informal settlement, seizing pendukas and other equipment that's used by illegal miners. A year ago, you'll recall, we had the horrific rapes in Mogale City of 8 women, and a sudden, police descending en masse on that area. But we're not seeing longer-term strategies to investigate the networks that are involved, to look, at who the kingpins are, to identify them, to look at how these networks operate, both within South Africa but across our borders. And that, in many ways, is the real challenge. There doesn't seem to be a clear strategy to tackle that and to investigate and to build up the information, to do the complex financial investigations that are necessary. To follow the flows of gold from South Africa and onwards.
In the article, you then mention that this illicit industry, in a way, is propelled by not just the kingpins working within South Africa's borders and possibly in the neighboring countries, but there are much bigger buyers. Talk to us about the countries that are benefiting from buying second-hand gold in South Africa, Southern Africa?
So much of this trade continues through predominantly to the United Arab Emirates, which is an international hub for gold trade. To a lesser degree, this trade also feeds into India and China, where there is also demand. And it's a multi-billion rand operation. There have been investigations, for instance, conducted by the South African Revenue Service, looking at some networks involved in a variety of gold activities and scams, in one case amounting to nearly 26 billion rand. So it's big numbers that we're talking about across the transnational level.
Yeah. And you will know, Julian, that South African politicians, as they like to refer, that China is our friend, the United Arab Emirates is our friend, India is our friend. How is it that our government is unable to appeal to those governments to help them stem the tide of this? Because this is now, going back to the analogy of the wound, this has become so gangrenous, if there is the term, that we are at the stage of actually needing to amputate now in order to stop this.
I think there are a couple of factors at play. One is, gold by its very nature is incredibly difficult to pin down. Once it's been smelted, once it's been exported, it becomes very difficult to tell the difference in what's legal and what's illegal. But that said, I think that it also speaks to some broader foreign policy issues. It speaks to law enforcement engagement with other states. On other crimes, for instance, South African law enforcement have had quite a good relationship with, for instance, their counterparts in China. And I'm speaking here about, illegal wildlife trade issues, for example, where there has been exchanges of information. There have been investigations which have been collaborated on. And that needs to happen in this case. But I think that, there's a wariness, certainly at a government level, to try and reach out to those compatible agencies. There's also a lack of cooperation. The UAE in particular, in many cases, is a black hole when it comes to illicit products moving through their finances, illicit financial flows that are moving through there. So it's incredibly challenging. But there is work that can be done within South Africa to unravel the syndicates that exist within our borders, and go far beyond simply, arresting fairly low-level zama-zamas.
So let's bring it back home. In the article, you mentioned how police stations that are located in close proximity to these illegal operations. Talk to us about the police officers there, and I think what you refer to perhaps as them being swallowed up by this illegal operation. Why is that the reason why, when communities say police are not doing anything, it genuinely is that they are not doing anything? If anything, they're contributing towards it. How are they doing so?
Yeah, I think I keep coming back to this idea of a law enforcement void that exists in communities like this, and it seems pretty apparent that there's very little law enforcement involvement there. So on the one hand, you have police who are, in some cases, too afraid or too disinterested in becoming involved in communities and carrying out policing. But in other instances, they are completely riddled with corruption. There are examples, for instance, in Northwest Province and in Mpumalanga, where local police stations in proximity to mines are, almost entirely consumed by the levels of corruption that exist there, where police vans, for instance, are being used to move gold and transport illegal miners and provide cover for them. So, it starts as, on the surface, is illegal mining, but it's cancerous. It spreads, it infects, and the corruption that aids and abets it extends very far beyond the mine shafts and the illegal miners themselves.
And the impact of this, Julian, I think this week, the events of this week, if it is not so clear for our authorities, then I don't know what will, because we have just come from the one incident in the Free State where a methane gas has affected the very so-called illegal miners who we understand are dead, and they now have to be taken out of that particular operation. If left unchecked, if left unattended, just how deadly are the consequences going to be for ordinary South Africans?
Well, we can see the consequences. You know, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, last year you had the horrific incident of 8 women that were raped. There's a propensity or the existence of high levels of violence that are associated with illegal mining, trafficking of firearms, some of them military-style weapons. We have the environmental and health consequences. This is one example where this canister of nitric oxide was cut open, or they were possibly trying to empty it out so that it could be used to make a penduka, to sift gold ore. But there are other chemicals too at play. You know, cyanide, mercury, and those toxins leach into the ground. They leach into water systems. So you know, there are enormous costs at an environmental level, and a cost to human health and safety. Last year, Police Minister Becky Cele said that there needed to be rolling action across all 4 provinces affected by illegal mining. And he said, you know, we really need to find the bosses. We need the investigations to do that. Where is the evidence that that's really happening?
In the article, you ended by saying that given the right reforms, investment, institutional leadership and political will, law enforcement can turn the tide against organized crime. Do you have hope that the South African authorities are starting to do that, or are you saying that the kind of action we saw following the rape incident last year of those 8 women, those short-term measures where we see the rounding up of hundreds of these so-called illegal miners, that's not going to help?
No, that won't help at all. What you do need are investigations, targeted investigations that are, you know, aimed at dismantling these and disrupting these networks. And I don't think we're seeing that yet. You know, the general response we get to organized crime or to crime in South Africa is that we need more police on the streets, and we're going to hire 10,000 new police and put them on the streets, or we're going to create crime wardens who can police our streets. What we really need are the skills, you know, people who can do financial investigations, people crime intelligence networks. You know, we know how you know, the enormous damage that has been done over the years through mismanagement of police crime intelligence and how ineffective it is. You know, that capacity needs to be rebuilt, probably from scratch. So there are dramatic efforts that need to take place, and I think that, you know, SAPS at a high level needs to become more aware of, you know, ways of building the skills and the capacity to tackle broader organized crime. Because in our view at the Global Initiative, you know, organized crime at this stage poses a very real and existential threat to South Africa and its democracy and its people.
Julian Rademeyer, thank you very much for putting us into the picture.
Thank
there.
you.
Hopefully we've painted that picture for you, and it goes back many years, as Julian said. In fact, this morning I suddenly thought 1994, those were the early beginnings of this so-called illegal mining trade, and I connected that with the start of the so-called arms deal. That's how old this is.